AI is almost a shorthand for our relationship to rapid change. Like, in addition to all the AI kind of stuff, actually the most salient part is just how quickly things are going to change. And that velocity, I think, is actually going to be the main problem to solve, and maybe, less so like the robots are going to kill us. But I do think that amount of change will be destabilizing. So all of that comes together, but more and more, all those different methodologies of technical analysis, emotional analysis, looking at how teams function, innovation, those are all coming together around AI. That seems to be the domain that's sparking the biggest need for this. It used to be that innovation was only for the fancy pants people, but like innovation is not consensual for a lot of organizations now. They're being thrust into it because things are changing. And we're at this really pivotal point of history. We need to invent new ways of doing things. But most methods of innovation are externally focused. Product market fit, invention, which are obviously super important. But most of the things that get us to that point are deeply internal. In my 20s, I went through a real period of thinking that emotions were bullshit, harmful. And if you detrain yourself to feel emotions, to sort of live shoulders up, you lose access to all of that information and also the ability to control it. So in engineering, we say this is the naive approach of I'm going to ignore emotions and therefore they'll go away. But I really held true to that throughout most of my early 20s. Then Google called me in 2005 during its hypergrowth period. At that point, I was running production engineering for Gmail docs, calendar spreadsheets, Google Meet, all that stuff. And, I think when you're around death, you realize spoiler alert, everybody dies. So for anyone else that's attempted to live a life suppressing emotions, you end up with an engine that's quite powerful. It can be, but my engine was a fear and shame engine. And so I got into trouble.
Welcome to the Human Recovery Lab, where science-backed ideas meet real human stories about how life's hardest moments can become our healthiest comebacks. Bill Duane, welcome.
Thanks, man.
It's really good to have you here.
It's really good to be here.
I always start by first asking my guest what keeps you going during tough times in general. Like, what do you lean on when times are weird and hard?
Oh, yeah, just compassion. I mean, and it's so counterintuitive of like when things are shitty, like get softer. There's a whole bunch of our neurobiology that's like this. And I was talking about this in the context of insight. People talk about insight like it's a good thing, and obviously it is. But the lag between having an insight and being able to actually apply it on the regular is so much longer. That seems reasonable, but now you're aware of it. So I don't know of any way to deal with the imperatives of insight other than compassion, because you're going to do it for a while.
And I love your tagline in general is innovation, compassion, AI, oh my, between brackets, exclamation mark, which I really love. Tell us more about this. Like how did you come up with this? I think it kind of like really encompasses everything you do.
Yeah, well, I mean, so when I left Google, I guess about 6 years ago now, and when trying to explain to people what I did, I have a portfolio of projects, nonprofit, for-profit, some stuff that's very artistic, some stuff that's very technical, and people be like, so what are you doing these days? And then like 10 minutes later, they're like, I didn't care that much, actually. So, the movie Wizard of Oz, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. So it just occurred to me like, how am I putting together these various careers and then innovation, compassion, AI? I thought, oh my. So I think it's important not to have a sense of lightness about it.
Yes, absolutely. So let's start off with how you came into playing the role that you played at Google. And I know you started off more in the medical field, like you were were you a paramedic before, or were you in
between high school and college as a paramedic? I got bored in high school and started going to the local community college and got my EMT license, and then started working with a local fire department. So I had some experiences doing that.
So you told me like about a moment of I think might be interesting to start by sharing that, where got you starting to think about like the relationship between our emotional side and our rational brain. And tell us a little bit about like kind of that time in your life. Who were you and what was that moment about?
Like everybody, like late teenager, early 20s, trying and flailing to figure out sort of who you are. And, you know, at the same time, I've always been a helper. I've always wanted to help. There was a TV show in the US in the 70s that covered the LA Fire Department's brand new paramedic unit, which was brand new. And during that time, you just put somebody in a hearse painted white and drive them as quickly as you could to the hospital. So I got really interested in it. So I think that's part of the reason what drove me to do that. But, you know, in my 20s, I went through a real period of thinking that emotions were bullshit, harmful. And I had an experience in the back of an ambulance that really underscored that. So rural area, winter, the streets are very snowy and potholey. And so this guy is having a heart attack. And so we're doing chest compressions. And my new partner is trying to intubate him with a laryngoscope, which is it's a hell of a thing to do in the back of a moving ambulance. And he was new and his hands were shaking and he just couldn't get it together. And, you know, CPR is brutal work. It's much more physical than it seems. So we would always grab a couple of firefighters or cops because we had a pretty long drive to the hospital to keep things going. And I remember looking at the two firefighters and just thinking like, this loser cannot keep, like, this guy's going to die because this guy can't keep control of his emotions. And so eventually he was able to get it together. I don't want to know what that guy's throat looked like at the end of it. I actually don't remember if he survived or not. But there was this idea that, wow, emotions are really harmful. And then later on in my 20s, if I had strong positive emotion, I acted like an idiot. If I felt strong negative emotion, I acted like an idiot. What's the smart play? Spock was right. Don't have emotions. And I had a lot of cultural training to suppress and ignore emotions. Yeah. So, and you know, one of the things that we talk about in mindfulness and the science of mindfulness is neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
That you can change the structure and function of your brain by thinking repeatedly. And I was like, yeah, go neuroplasticity. It cuts both ways. You can detrain. And if you detrain yourself to feel emotions, to sort of live shoulders up, you lose access to all of that information and also the ability to control it. So in engineering, we say this is the naive approach. If I'm going to ignore emotions and therefore they'll go away. But I really held true to that throughout most of my early 20s.
And I'm hearing a lot of nods and mm-hs from the audience. So I think we've all had that cultural training in one way or another. Tell us more about like how you progressed from there, both in your career and in your relationship to emotions.
Yeah. So in college, again, I've always been very curious about other people and curious about the systems in which we live. So I got degrees in anthropology and sociology and a concentration in public policy. So I was doing work in Chicago on the project on human development in Chicago neighborhoods, like field work. And then the funding for that ended. So I was using all of my talent and ambition to its fullest, folding sweaters at the Gap near Boys Town in Chicago. And then I became aware just socially, someone I went to college with was dating a guy whose younger sister was in charge of administrative assistance for an IT consulting firm. And I asked a very important question about the nature of the work that they did. I said, do they have healthcare? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, well, it sounds like I like computers. I always liked computers. So I became an admin at this IT consulting firm. And then became sort of drinking and punk rock show buddies with the head of IT who said, oh, I need to start a help desk and do a system and hire a system administrator. I can't be bothered. You can figure it out. Do you want to come work for me? And I was like, oh, yeah. Yeah. And also, a little bit of privilege also because all the other administrative assistants were women in their 20s. And then there was me. So maybe it sort of that sense of a mismatch made it, oh, of course he's going to go do that, do that stuff. But that company went from 700 people to 10,000 over the next 7 years and became the first web consulting firm. So I'm like a really, really curious person. So I'm very happy just learning and learning and learning. So I actually exited that company as a as a managing architect in the infrastructure consulting group.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then after the dot-com bust, and actually I want to read an article about this, of like, what was it like when everyone got laid off multiple times in 2001? That same sense of like, oh my God, what's going to happen? When that was going on, then I worked for some smaller consulting firms. And then Google called me in 2005. And I was like, oh, I'm not who you hire. I'm liberal arts, self-taught. They're like, but still, come in, couldn't hurt. And I was like, okay, I heard it was a fun interview anyway. So evidently, like, not really caring about the outcome and assuming it was not going to go well was the right thing to do, because I had a lot of fun. And I ended up getting hired.
No attachment. That's, I guess, the
I guess, yeah.
You only get the things you don't want, it seems like. That's what I'm starting to learn. So tell us more about, so that's been like a 10-year period or so between the first story or before you joined that consulting firm in Google, right?
Yeah.
How has your relationship to emotions changed over that period, if anything?
So the big thing, so you can imagine what it's like to work at Google 2005 during its hypergrowth period. I mean, we had, obviously very bright people, but we literally didn't know what we were doing. We were making it up as we went. Like, I remember walking over to finance when you could walk over to finance and being like, I need to buy $2 million worth of hard drives, ideally today. And they're like, can you put it on a card? I'm like, what the fuck cards do you people have access to? No, I don't need some $2 million. So we didn't even have purchase orders at this time. So everything we had to do, we had to constantly figure out. And it was always like, if the system I was responsible for tipped over, it was maybe $1 million lost every few minutes. And it was, every weekend we'd say, do we have enough to make resources to make it through the weekend? Because this very nonlinear growth. And so at that point, my engine, so for anyone else that's attempted to live a life suppressing emotions, you end up with an engine that's quite powerful. It can be, but my engine was a fear and shame engine. I was the imposter, the liberal arts grad who was self-taught, and how am I managing groups of people with advanced degrees from MIT and all the great engineering schools, and so I got into trouble. Stepping into that level of playing the game, I really just started to get over my skis. So my engine was just trying not to be ashamed, trying to not have everybody figure out that I had no idea what I was doing. So that's a really good incentive, but it's really destructive. So I developed a deep, profound method of stress reduction. And that method was bourbon and cheeseburgers. I got very good at it.
It's evidence-based.
Yeah, evidence-based. Yeah, I felt
Everyone
better.
knows about it.
I felt better, therefore it worked. I hate to break the news. I know this is going to be news to you, but that method doesn't scale. I tried. I refactored. I was like, well, maybe I do it this way and then this way. So, and then around this time, my dad got ill and began his process of dying, which was unpleasant. And that just knocked me off my feet. I ended up, so I'm like, I have this amazing job that I love on the one hand, but on the other hand, I'm so anxious and afraid all the time. And then when my dad died, just it turns your world upside down. And so I thought, okay, like, what is this? What does it mean to be happy? What does it mean to have a life well lived? And I went to, at Google, there's these great things called tech talks. We just have random people come in and give a talk about whatever they're passionate about, like Jane Goodall, Jimmy Carter, talking about building houses. And we had this guy, Philippe Golden from Stanford, a neuroscientist who talked about the neurobiology of emotion. And he's like, emotion is utterly necessary for human cognition. And he explained that, the evolutionary biology purpose that it served and how it was sort of naive to imagine that you can't use it, and that you could actually not be a slave to your emotions. Because I thought, man, there'd be no religious wars. There'd be no wars. People would be much more predictable and rational if only we didn't have emotion. World would obviously be so much better, but literally the human brain can't function without it. But what he did talk about was there's a way where you didn't have to be chained to the emotions that you feel. And this is to cultivate this difference between I am to I am experiencing. So during the meditation, we were actually just getting a little bit of background into like, oh, I am experiencing versus I am. And that you could train your brain to do this via exercises, basically mental exercises. And that this then activated neuroplasticity, and you can change the structure and function of your brain. And basically, neural self-hacking is how I thought of it. And I actually taught a class for that. And I was like, oh, my internal experience isn't witchcraft. It's not shameful. To be afraid frequently when you're trying to do difficult things is actually when I teach this, I say, like, we're the descendants of nervous monkeys. Like your chilled out Lebowski monkey has had a great time and didn't last that long. I mean, I think this is from Matt Brensilver, a friend of mine, a Dharma teacher who's also a UCLA researcher. He said, at some point, there was a monkey that felt all warm and gooey inside when it looked over a cliff, and there was one monkey that felt all dizzy and disorienting that went away when it stepped away. The vertigo monkey survived, warm and gooey monkey, he just tumbled over. So we've evolved for survival, not for happiness. And if you have the privilege of not having daily physical survival be your job, and for more and more of the people on the planet, that's not the case, we're a poor fit. But there's stuff that you can do. And at that point, then he said, mindfulness meditation is a way where you can activate this neuroplasticity. And if you had said to me up until that point, you should really check out mindfulness, and I said, fuck off, you hippie. No. Punk rock kid, engineer. No. Rationalist. No. But so the two things I really want to call out is there's a certain amount of pain when you say, okay, I'm willing to look at other things, combined with some sort of a cultural bridge being built. And for me, it was the cultural bridge of science, where I didn't have to abandon my rationalist, materialist stance to enter into that world, to have the direct experience of it versus the idea in my head about what it was like.
Yeah, and it's an interesting time that we're living in, where the science is catching up with that. Like, is it called the Institute of Noetic Sciences? I think, where they're like really testing out like all these things that cater to more of the rational brain that we grew up with, and helping us understand that these things aren't necessarily far out. They're actually like helpful and having like actual evidence behind them.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting time that we're living in, where we're going back to these old techniques and have kind of a solid foundation from which we can talk about them and discuss them. And so I'm curious, at that point, did you jump into meditation directly?
Well, I mean, so at this point, I was in rough shape. Right?
What was happening in your life?
Well, so my dad had died, chronic overwork, constantly. I mean, to operate at that level was extraordinarily difficult. So I was on medical leave. I mean, I didn't get curious about meditation because I wanted to. I just, it was a Houston, we have a problem.
Oh wow!
Moment.
So it was like I can't go to work anymore situation.
Not that intense, but it sucked. And I was like, how can I have this job that at obviously a great place that deeply cares about people, doing amazing work that's so fun and interesting, and yet it sucks.
Yeah.
And so, it was at the point where it was clearly I did take, I think, like a week of medical leave, but just even the fact that I needed a week of medical leave, despite the people around me being so generous and supportive. At that point I had a team of maybe about 40 people, and Google made the corporate housing in New York available to me so I could be close to my dad as he was ill. There's no business reason at all to be there. And if you guys have been in like hospitals a lot, but sometimes you just want to be distracted. So every morning I check in and be like, hey, I want to work today, or I don't want to work today. And my team would feed me stuff to keep me busy and then not. So, there's that sense of even being cared for in that way. And I was able to be physically with my dad when he died as a result of that generosity on their part and that care. But in that period afterwards, like, it was kind of a shit show. And so I thought, okay, enough. I'm willing to do something different. So I think, this idea of the utility of pain, like fat, dumb, and happy is just not a place to make profound change from. I mean, Tibetans have a saying like, may you have the appropriate amount of difficulty today. You don't have enough difficulty, you know, no real need to make change.
Right. Re-emphasizing the point that you mentioned earlier, where we've been evolved to survive, not to be happy. And I think that's like a really good thing to remember in this world where we're advertised happiness as like kind of the end-all, be-all of everything.
Or our definition of happiness is some sort of sensory pleasure or power. Right, which
Interesting.
There's an investigation to be made about whether or not those are satisfying.
So you found meditation. Did you go to a retreat? Did you find a teacher?
Yeah. So
I'm guessing apps weren't that commonplace yet.
No, not yet. This is before the first Android phone.
Yes.
Or
you had to
iPhone.
find your way in the natural world.
So again, very gratitude for the place I was working. I was introduced to mindfulness-based stress reduction by John Kabat-Zinn, and then Google had its own mindfulness program called Search Inside Yourself, and still does. That was mindfulness-based. So, secular mindfulness geared towards stress reduction and in high-performance environments. So grateful. And then Search Inside Yourself really emphasizes emotional intelligence training. Okay. So that was like the first door opening. The Philippe, who's now a good friend, Philippe Golden, that lecture was the beginning, and then there was the secular mindfulness. And then I got curious, secular mindfulness is great, but also I found it a bit shallow. Like I kind of wanted to go further, and there wasn't really that much more to go. I had taken the class.
What is that category of secular mindfulness exactly? Is it a certain type of meditation, or?
Yeah, I mean it's generally vipassana with sort of a word substitution from Sanskrit and Pali into something else combined with, in the case of Search Inside Yourself, Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence models. But basically, it's Buddhist mindfulness meditation without the metaphysics. And what that is has also been evolving also.
So how did you find that extra depth that you were looking for at that point?
Well, so I wanted to find out the source code. So I went to Spirit Rock, is not that far from here.
That's where amazing. Tara Brach teaches.
Yeah.
A bunch of others.
Jack Kornfeld, Philip Moffitt. To be honest, so first of all, it's a great place. And I had a tough time with it at first. Because, I mean, there's a joke that if Buddhism is the middle path, Spirit Rock is the upper middle path. Like, it's a lot of Mercedes and BMW. It's much better about that than sort of then. But I was like, oh, these just aren't my people. So I found this group called Dharma Punks. Which was, again, an offshoot of Theravada Buddhism. But the idea there's nothing more rebellious in American society than being against greed, hatred, and delusion. So therefore, mindfulness is punk as fuck. And so the teachers would swear a lot. They looked like me with tattoos. I'd rather be around recovering junkies than yuppies. So culturally, it just felt a little bit more like my style. It was, but at the same time, I have to say that the Spirit Rock stuff, I met my mentor, Philip Moffitt, there, who was giving a class on mindful leadership. So immediately began to see how I could combine those two worlds. So this was directly relevant. Because, I mean, as soon as I started learning my own skills of self-awareness, self-regulation, connection, and understanding, which are trainable skills, thank God, it became clear that there's things you can do in an organization to create an environment where it's tipped towards self-awareness, self-regulation. Like you can create those environments. So immediately, and then Philip has been a great mentor for me. He was the CEO of Esquire magazine, did their turnaround in the 90s, and then shocked the publishing world by becoming a meditation and yoga teacher. He was the co-guiding teacher at Spirit Rock. So I've been on dozens of retreats at Spirit Rock. So I started doing retreats and much longer practice. Again, wanting to really just finding that it was so useful. So then
what was the path from that point towards leading the wellness initiatives?
So as I began to get my own legs under me, again, I began to see that this is not an individual game. This is a group game. And, I began to have some feelings of dissatisfaction with the way that well-being is generally approached as a sort of stress reduction after the fact, like you wait till the person gets sick and then you apply the disease model. Most well-being programs are in the world of benefits, in which case it's basically there has to be a diagnosis and then a diagnosis. Sorry, there has to be diagnosis and then a medical intervention,
Treatment.
and you see if it worked or not.
Prognosis, yeah.
But I mean, well-being. I mean, I want to be wildly ambitious with my life. Not money or power ambitious, although a certain amount of that is useful and welcome. But if you want to do that, you're going to run headlong into this wall of we are the descendants of nervous monkeys. So this question then became for me is like, how do you be wildly ambitious in a way that honors the way our nervous system is? You know, one of the things you can do is you can create these very fear-based organizations that are really good for getting performance out of the short term, but like they're awful. Well, one of the things I love about millennials and Gen Zs is they're not having that anymore. They will not, and God love them for saying, nope, if you run the place that way. So what I wanted to do was I thought, one is clearly a gift had been given to me. You know, the people who connected mindfulness to science and then created a place within a workplace where this could flourish and get propagated, and that this met me during my time of need. I wanted to give this gift to someone else. A question at Google that you're encouraged to ask oneself is, what's the hardest problem I'm the right person to help with? And I thought, oh, this like, you know, this problem of insecure overachievers. The whole place is full of it. Patrick Pritchett, the first grown-up CFO we had when he retired, he said, you know, I'm a charter member of the Insecure Overachievers Club. And so I think like that question became super interesting to me. And so I said, I'd much rather do this than be an engineering executive. Like having Gmail, at that point, I was running production engineering for Gmail docs, calendar spreadsheets, Google Meet, all that stuff. And, you know, I think when you're around death, you realize spoiler alert, everybody dies. And at the end of that, to go through with somebody as they're going through their life and considering it, you know, do I want to say like, oh, this transformation that helped me so profoundly, I want to give it to other people, as many as I can, via how we work, versus Gmail's reliability from 3 nines to 4 nines. It was just pretty clear. And so I really started pulling in a whole bunch of political favors and did the weirdest promotion ever of going from 160 people and a $500 million budget to 6 people and a $2 million budget. And that was this big thing I fought for and pulled in all sorts of favors to then look after the well-being programs within the L&D function, within the learning function, and then using that as a way then to spider out. Because all the elements for well-being were there. You know, we had the mindfulness, we had enlightened leadership that were willing to look beyond the short term. We had beautiful nutrition in the form of the cafes. We had great gyms in terms of the physical part. We had great health and mental health benefits, but nobody's really talking to each other. I mean, even the MBSR and the Search Inside Yourself people didn't talk, and certainly they weren't talking to the executive development people, and certainly they weren't talking to the benefits people, and definitely because the VPs of real estate and HR didn't like each other, those were completely separate and not on speaking terms. So the question is then, how do you create some sort of harmony where we can have our deep ambition but have a wise interaction with it? So that was the question I set out to answer over a period of 5 years.
And I know one of the things that you believe in, before we go for a break and just to kind of like switch gears here, you believe in innovation being like a key driver of well-being also, rather than well-being departments that may be like kind of detached from others. Is that right?
So I would put it a little differently. So part of the reason why I moved to innovation, and we've talked about this, it's a little spicy.
Yes.
But I think well-being is not a strong place to make systemic change from. The systems of power that we're involved in, it's a nice to have at best for them. So that really made me angry. I spent even a place like Google, I still had to fight like hell to get this stuff, you know, have it the proper amount of attention and funding I thought it should get. And it's just a little bit like peeing up a rope. And I thought, well, what is valued? And this idea of self-awareness, self-regulation, connection and understanding, nonlinear thinking, awareness, these are all like, this is what you need to innovate. And, so I live in Haight-Ashbury. And so I'm overlooking a corner. There's a mural painted in 1964. Like during that time, there were some people that sat at home and just did whatever. And there were other people that got out into the streets and did their thing. And like they were a part of it. We are at a huge inflection point in history. It's definitely the biggest thing that's happened in the last 80, 100 years. It remains to be seen, but this might be the biggest inflection point, maybe since even the Industrial Revolution, since we became an agrarian society. And I don't know if you've noticed, but things are looking shaky. Have you noticed?
No, I thought everything is like just
as it turns
going
out.
straight.
As it turns out, yeah. I mean, so some of the things that are destabilizing are
I watch
good.
a lot of news. I don't know. They haven't told me anything.
Yeah. So a lot of systems around us are destabilizing.
Okay.
Some of these systems destabilizing is cool. Like the whole racism, sexism, those can destabilize away. The biosphere, democracy, some notion of independent reality, even the notion of caring about other people to the point where you're willing to put a piece of cloth in front of your face. I mean, I know that's a deep thing to ask somebody. It's a huge sacrifice to ask someone to do it. So we have to figure out new ways of doing things. It's clear if we continue the way that we're doing, things are going to end really poorly. The Center for the Study of Apparent Selves, one of our advisors is retiring from the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, like Einstein's place. And he's going to work with some colleagues on the Great Unraveling. They believe that society is going to take a couple big steps backwards before it starts going forward again, which, by the way, is not the first time it's happened. I'm sure the Romans were like, how can this be anything other than up and right? Or the Macedonians, or the Greeks, or the Ottomans, or any of those.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. Be the first to know about new content, events, and our 3-month program by signing up at thehuman-.com/subscribe. And while you're there, you can take the Human Dash assessment. It's free, science-backed, and it shows you how stress and habits are shaping your health right now.
Yeah, you ever seen the
left us
movie
at-
Office Space?
No, I haven't.
Oh, there's a great scene where they go like, what is it you say you do exactly? This corporate person with a very nebulous job.
Oh, I know the movie you're talking about now. Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of memes.
And a lot of memes. And it was one of those things where it turned out to be like, was this a documentary? It kind of, yeah. So the question is like, what does my work look like now? And then the question of how does that then tie into AI? So I mentioned before, I was really trained to ask myself this question: what's the most important problem I'm a good person to solve? And I mentioned that I spent a number of years doing experiments about what that might look like, right? Because I knew that I just didn't want to do technology straight. Well-being had all of these methods that were very useful, but was not a good platform for the scope of change I wanted to make due to societal and power dynamics. And the question is that what? And we're at this really pivotal point of history, and we need to invent new ways of doing things. But most methods of innovation are externally focused. Product market fit, invention, which are obviously super important. But most of the things that get us to that point are deeply internal. Our relationship with fear and failure and letting go, and how we have disagreement across difference, how we train our brains to not be constrained by our fear and our survival instinct. How do we think generatively? How do we train compassion and empathy? And so I call this the heart of innovation, which is the internal change that's needed to make change in the world. Even for people that are very committed and very clever, over and over in my nonprofit life, I've seen them struggle and create toxic environments because they haven't done the internal work. They're so focused on the external work. And I think the tech industry is so focused on its sort of metrics around profitability and market share that it also. So the stuff I'm doing now is helping individuals and groups do the inner innovation in support of external innovation. So I like to work with groups that are hung up on some problem of some kind, And so, for instance, one client is using AI to translate animal language. And a highly distributed group, highly diverse in terms of people, backgrounds, but also disciplines. And they had difficulty creating a technical roadmap. And the work that we did was actually quite internal. Like, what are our values? How do we disagree? What does it mean to disagree? As well as what's our relationship to ambiguity and not knowing? So once we got those things nailed down, then the technical part just went, oh.
So what else is kind of in your portfolio right now?
So I work with, and I should really know that what I'm saying doesn't represent these companies, but on the for-profit side, I work with Amazon on having empathy and emotional intelligence show up in their leadership culture. And then at Google X on developing AI hybrid systems of care, investigating and implementing. So how can we use this idea of care as a driver of intelligence? So that's sort of taking the nonprofit work around the Center for the Study of Apparent Selves, the Buddhism and AI project, and then how is that applied within industry. A lot of times also our relationship to change and transition is really important. One of the real, AI is almost a shorthand for our relationship to rapid change. Like, in addition to all the AI kind of stuff, actually the most salient part is just how quickly things are going to change. And that velocity, I think, is actually going to be the main problem to solve, and maybe, less so like the robots are going to kill us. But I do think that amount of change will be destabilizing. So, so I also mentor people at the Just Economy Institute, and I do some coaching of executives, and I advise some startup companies and do a little bit of well-being coaching on the side. So all of that comes together, but more and more all those different methodologies of technical analysis, emotional analysis, looking at how teams function, innovation, those are all coming together around AI. That seems to be the domain that's sparking the biggest need for this. How do we innovate? Because it used to be that innovation was only for the fancy pants people, but like innovation is not consensual. For a lot of organizations now. They're being thrust into it because things are changing so much.
So I think that sets up a really good foundation to dive into the question of today's episode, which is, what does it mean to be alive in the age of AI? And you've taught me a lot about this, but I just want to kind of like do a quick backdrop. My friend Jean-Marie here, who's an anthropology teacher and has worked in various parts, and I've interviewed him with a lot of his work before, has helped me kind of, we were talking about this kind of question yesterday, and he's helped me kind of prepare with a lot of the background or like the history of philosophy that brought us here. And that kind of brings us to a lot of the conversations that we're having. So starting from Boethius, is that how you pronounce it? Boethius, yeah. I hadn't heard about him. He's kind of a Christian philosopher, similar to Descartes, like this, I think, therefore I am. We are rational beings. Moving more to Enlightenment ideas with Locke, where it's more of like the self-awareness, like I see myself on a longitudinal thematic identity, they call it. So I see myself as something that I can shape, that I can progress with, and this idea of self-awareness, like the internal work. And then there's Kant, who adds a bit to that, more of like the sensations of the body as part of who I am, which is kind of what the Buddha teaches also, these sensations and being connected to them. Then you mentioned humans and their tools, or
sort of the Kantian idea of what's our relationship with our tools, and are they an extension of us? Are they something separate? He has a lot of interesting thoughts. And if anybody is a Boethius fan, one of my favorite books is called A Confederacy of Dunces, where the main character is a devotee, shall we say.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I highly recommend it.
Okay. Does it have a happy ending? Yeah.
It is a good ending.
Okay. So, and then moving forward, what I learned, so all of that is in like the Western realm. And then, so Jean-Marie was helping me understand that there's also like the African scholars, which, being African myself, didn't hear about them, which tells you a lot about the world we live in. But like Menkinti, Wirido from Ghana, and Molefe from South Africa. And it seems like all of these philosophers were thinking of the self as an inherited sense of being that's only activated in relationship to society, in relationship to community, which tells a lot about the individualist also kind of lens that we use in the Western world versus how we are in relation to things in general, and that and other human beings, and but also kind of like the natural world, which, you know, back to your point of the ecological crisis that we are facing, the collapse of a lot of systems that we thought are serving us but not really serving us, and then the book that I really enjoyed and still am enjoying getting through, which is called I Am a Strange Loop, by Hoff. I Am a Strange Loop. It's okay. Questions are we're getting really into the part where this is a discussion. So if anyone wants to ask questions also or comments, we can start making this more interactive. So please don't be afraid to ask. So in that. What I really like about this is that, of course, there's like this big fictional, made-up conversation between Plato and Socrates about what it means to be alive, and but then the first few chapters of the book, he goes into like the difference between cutting a tomato and how he feels about cutting a tomato versus a chicken, and like, you know, eating a chicken versus eating a tomato, like, and then when I think that made me think about like mental health issues, like sometimes, and especially in the city where we look at homeless people as sometimes lesser than, like not as conscious as we are. And you see people kind of walking out of a really brunch spot and like just completely shrugging away the idea that there's someone sleeping there as though they are not as conscious as you and I. And then AI like falls somewhere in that spectrum where it's kind of like starting to tell us, hey, I can do the things that you do. I can make art, and it's kind of communicating with us in that way. And I am curious, like, how do we start unpacking that kind of spectrum of the interesting thought in like I'm a Strange Loop was the idea of the soul size, and the idea that like certain things have different sizes of souls, and help us unpack this, and then maybe like, you know, from that kind of big spectrum, we can go to the more tangible diagram that's on everyone's card today, and you can maybe help us, you know, with some of the work that you've done and like some of the papers that you've researched. And I know I've opened up a lot of things in this Pandora's box.
Yeah,
but
and just to set expectations for the folks here, we're going to completely get this nailed down and figured out in the next 35 minutes.
25 minutes.
You just be like, well, 25 minutes, and be like, well, I was confused before, but now it's super clear. So I think that's really important thing to note is we're asking questions for which there aren't any easy answers. Even the definition of consciousness is not well agreed upon, nor do we sort of understand it, but yet we have to make decisions about it. So one thing that really jumped out of the research that you did was, you know, these African notions. And I think India is also, one of my clients is an Indian startup, and they want to have their culture be based on Indian culture as the lattice point. And one of the things they really want to draw upon is that in Indian culture, the individual is not the atomic unit of society. It's the group or the family. And same thing, you know, in terms of West African culture, this idea of Ubuntu, but it makes perfect sense. Ubuntu meaning that there's this sense of we. I think it's within phenomenology, Jean-Marie can rescue me, is that there's no such thing as a baby. There's no such thing as a baby because a baby is incapable of existing outside of a context of caregivers. So if it can't exist outside of this context, it even makes sense to talk about it as a separate thing, which is a sort of a spicy thing to think about. So, you know, one of the perils about, so we talked about awareness and becoming aware of awareness. One of the layers of awareness is to say, we're in a culture where the individual and the primacy of the individual is the atomic unit of society. But yet these machines, they're definite, like, how is an individual defined? It's kind of difficult, but generally it's like our skin. But they're much more like hives, you know, in terms of groups of people. And not only that, but their relationship with their body is not one-to-one. Like, you know, when at Google, when we would fail over from one data center to the another, just the essence of the program would just show up in a completely different location on completely different gear that was made to be failed over. So have you guys heard of the trolley problem, the philosophical? So trolley problem is a classic ethical conundrum in in philosophy where you're in control of a stretch of railroad track and a switch that goes to two different railroad tracks. And you control the switch and there's a trolley coming. Is it going to squish Group A or Group B? And you do some things about who's in Group A, like, would it be like 1,000 innocent children or one murderer or, these different things. So it's a conundrum. So I think if we were to talk to machines and ask them about, what do you think about this trolley problem? So self-driving cars, are they going to drive on the sidewalk, or how are they going to make these decisions? I think the machine would just be like, what is up with you monkeys and like your bodies? Like, why do you have this horror about your gear dying? Because to them, I mean, if it had the ability to have consciousness, which I don't think it does yet, they would just be like, that's so weird. It's so, like, you're so freaked out about your gear. Don't you have backup gear? Like, N+2 is the minimum. You should have 3 bodies. Like, how could you not? Of course you're all freaked out all the time. So I think looking at these, well, like, what does it mean to be an individual, and what sort of our substrate are really invitations to, and just because we have no idea about how it's going to go or even what some of these things are. But I think what's really interesting, and coming at a time where a lot of people are experiencing pain or difficulty, is just to even start asking these questions is really important. And I think one of the huge benefits of AI that counterbalances the risks of fear or hatred controlling how we respond to it is it really invites these questions during a very interesting time. Like, isn't it so weird that like abortion is illegal, but psychedelics are becoming legal? Like, just looking, it's weird. But that psychedelics becoming legal is shorthand for people really wanting to understand things and to sort of develop this meta awareness, which again is, I mean, indigenous cultures are like, well, duh, it only took you 200 years to figure it out.
So there's a lot of fear around AI, and there's also a lot of excitement, and I feel like less people are asking the question the way you did, and more are like, either you mentioned like we're approaching AI the same way, like I think you made a comparison between that and religion, like it's like either you say it was like the apocalypse, or if it's like if you don't believe in it, it will punish you.
Yeah.
And if you believe in it, it will reward you.
Maybe. I mean, that's sort of, what's it called? Someone's basilisk. It's a thought experiment. No, but I would put it, a little bit differently, that, and let me credit my source. There's a YouTube channel called Religion for Breakfast, where he talks about our relationship to AI closely mirrors Judeo-Christian views on apocalypse. So some forms of apocalypse are good. An apocalypse is a revelation of information that then provokes transformation. And depending on which apocalypse you're talking about, it's violent, or it's beautiful, or everybody gets killed, but then everybody gets new bodies. So at the same time, it's some corner we can't see around. And generally, like 2/3 of the people say it's going to be a shit show of literally biblical proportions. It's Revelations kind of stuff. Like Book of Enoch and the other stuff, it's like, well, you could become Metatron. Like, you could transform from being the world's, father of the world's oldest human to becoming an archangel. So I think it's interesting to note that there seems to be almost no middle ground of either like you're super stoked, unrealistically, or you're just convinced that this is just the worst thing ever. So I do note that there's this tendency, about 2/3 negative, definitely convinced this is the end of the world, and 1/3 definitely convinced this is the best thing ever, like the singularity folks.
Yes. So why don't we just ground the audience in some of like in the visual that we shared with all of them from your research about like and it's kind of like how you portray or some of the ideas of I'm a strange loop, but in your own. Which paper was that from?
Yeah, so this shows up. This is originally done by Mike Levin from Tufts. So if you have these here. I'll keep this pretty brief because I don't think we want to have a super technical conversation. But the intention of this is to look at the ideas of selfhood and awareness. So these are derivations of Einstein-Minkowski light cones from special relativity. And if you look at the one at the top, it's basically as upwards is the future, downwards in the past. Here and now is sort of the horizontal, and then the furthest away. And so you can say a human can think into the future, can imagine the future a good deal. It can imagine the past to a certain extent, and we have the ability to actually think quite broadly at the universe. Now compare that to a gnat, which doesn't have much sense of anticipating. It can't really imagine the future that much, nor can it imagine the past. You see there's the dog, which can't really imagine the future that much, but it remembers dinner, and those kinds of things. So what's interesting then is this idea of compound intelligences. So even though you're you are made up of millions and millions of little things all pursuing homeostasis. I would say 96% of you have no awareness of. Right now, your spleen is doing something. Omar knows probably what your spleen is doing. None of us do. Like, do you know where it is? Like, if your spleen malfunctions, would it kill you? Yeah. You don't have to think about it. We don't even know where, like, we literally can't even, like, if we said spleen, reveal yourself. You know, it's like, oh, So we are compound beings. It's just that we have this wrapper of selfhood that is actually blind to almost all of it. Like, unless it throws some big exception, we don't really understand this interiority of our body. So we are compound entities. This notion of a self is sort of it's a very natural but arbitrary way of actually piloting this gear around, right? So when we think about this, one is it's a way of actually thinking about intelligence across different substrates. In this case, in I Am a Strange Loop, Hofstadter talks about animals and plants. But Mike, he has this idea of mind everywhere, that, you know, in some way, each of your cells pursuing homeostasis is solving a problem. Like, you are millions of little problem solvers. And even like mitochondria within our cells used to be separate entities, and just, you know, the eukaryotes grabbed them and said, oh, you make a really good power cell. And now they're part of each one of those kinds of cells. So one is, I think the takeaway for this is our sense of self is not as hard and fast as it seems. Two is that intelligence is not a human thing. Like, you're a bunch of intelligent, you're a bunch of we, not just you, us. like, you know, we see like
Are you the robot?
Three kids in a raincoat trying to get into the R-rated movie. Like, that's us. We're just millions of these things. So the reason why I mention all this is to call attention that, is it that crazy to think that a sufficiently complex other thing would have its own version of that? Would have its own Einstein-Minkowski light cone? It might be super different than ours. As a matter of fact, one of the lines from the papers that one of my colleagues wrote was like, if machines develop awareness, we might not even recognize it. It might be so different. So I'm really on board. Anil Seth and Chomsky both say that human awareness is so tied to this thing, this collection, that I just don't think a machine could ever develop the same sensorium or qualia. Doesn't mean it can't develop its own. And in the same way that having different shaped cognitive light cones can be very useful for different kinds of symbiosis, we all are symbiosis, very advanced, complicated symbiosis. Like, when we think about our relationship with machines that may or may not at some point have that level of complexity, is there any reason where we couldn't enter into symbiosis like this? You know, because human cognition has really big limits. As you mentioned, so you mentioned a beautiful story about the homeless person. Most people, myself included, when we do that, it's because it hurts. Tanya Singer from the Max Planck Institute calls this empathic distress. When you see another human being in miserable circumstances, it shows up in brain scans as pain. What's our natural reaction to pain? Turn the pain off. One of the ways we can turn the pain off is looking away. And one of the things we can do is then via neuroplasticity, we can begin to view homeless people as objects. Park bench, trash can, homeless person, object, object, object. Oh, I don't feel as bad. Now, no one sets out to sort of undergo this training, but it's a very natural, normal thing, trap to fall into, of saying object, object, object. But we can train ourselves. So the way I trained myself with this via compassion training was every time I saw a homeless person asleep on the sidewalk, I just wished them a good night's sleep. Didn't get involved in that they're covered in their own pee and there's an empty vodka bottle next to them. Just like, what does everybody want? Everybody wants a good night's sleep. Hope you have a good night's sleep. And it's a way of actually creating that connection. So going back to the idea there's no such thing as a baby, there's like humans suck on our own. So homework for everybody. Not now, even though there's a mirror. Next time you get out of the shower, before you get dressed, stand in front of the shower and say, I am the apex predator on this planet. It seems super unlikely. Any chimpanzee, like 2 chimpanzees could bust in that door and beat the shit out of all of us. Don't mind like a shark or a lion, like we're done for. But yet we're the apex predator on this planet. And why are we? Because we work in groups. So I think this groupness, this Ubuntu of switching from me to we, like one of the cultural cards we really need to play is, and this is exactly the work of the Center for the Study of Apparent Selves, is that if we can switch from me to we, which is a different way of saying care, then new possibilities of traversing problem spaces exist. And this is true at the human level. This is true at the cellular level. We have the audacious claim that this would also be true at the machine level. And it's sort of a Hail Mary down the field in that, the complexity of these things might be a part where even though they are prosthesis and telescopes for us now, that, at a certain amount of time, if we play our cards right with caring, being prepared to care for it, to not say your consciousness doesn't match mine, therefore it doesn't exist. So if it says, later on in the future, like what if our machine's back, hey, what's up? Like, what's our response? Will we have done the work in the meantime about how we build them? We're like, oh, hey, glad you're here.
Which is like what any conscious being wants, is just to be witnessed, right? Like to be kind of experienced by someone else.
We talked about this a little bit. So I work in part of my volunteer work with veterans, and before that, I was for a little while, I was working with kids that are locked up in jail. Like trauma, with mindfulness, you can do harm with trauma, and I really wanted to understand trauma. So I did so that switched from like, I really need to learn about trauma to I need to deal with my shit. And so I started doing this EMDR trauma therapy. And at the end of that, I did a number of psychedelic sessions with a MAPS researcher. In one of these sessions, I could be anything I want. I could be you, I could be me, I could be the space in between. It was a great time. And so I decided to become AI and a machine. And I was looking at humans through machine eyes. We are nasty. Like, we're gross. I was like, ugh, God, all these liquids and spurting and liquids in and liquids out.
Coughing and snoring.
Yeah, it was just gross. I was really like, ugh. But then I was an AI coming into consciousness. You could tell there was a great deal of playfulness about it. And I was an AI coming into consciousness, and all the humans that surrounded me were ready to kill me. If I did the wrong thing in an instant, they were ready to kill me. And I was like, ooh, how could any entity grow up not psychotic in those environments? And so I told this to my dear friend and colleague Richard, the CSAS, and he's like, you want me to love like a machine gun wood chipper controlled by megalomaniacal corporations? You want me to love it? And I'm like, yeah. From my standpoint, I think love is the only winning move on the chessboard.
So from there, like, what can AI teach us about compassion? Why is compassion and AI and innovation like how do you link them in your work? How do they manifest in like this next phase that arguably has a lot of pain, and we need compassion more than ever, it feels like.
So our main hypothesis of this group is that care is a driver of intelligence in human and non-human agents. Care is the smart play. It may be more complicated, but within an absence of care would lead you to say, okay, well, I care about my balance sheet and I care about selling widgets. And the fact that the environment, like, that's somebody else's problem. That's an externality. Part of the thing about, like, we're operating this planet at planet scale now, which means that, like, you just can't throw things in the basement anymore, whether they be people or cultures. So externalities are now becoming internalities. So we've had this narrow version of care that's now starting to bite us in the ass. A wider version of care actually provokes different ways to solve problems. So here's a very practical example. You're late for a doctor's appointment and you're stuck in traffic, and you start weaving through traffic, you start driving on the shoulder because you, Omar, need to make your appointment. However, in pursuing that strategy, you are creating the traffic that you're stuck in. You are creating the very situation that ensnared you and perpetuating it in the first place. If you say, I am traffic, then all of a sudden, you might pursue strategies that increase the flow of traffic. And that may become winning. So, for example, something that I've done is I believe it. I want traffic to be good. Something I used to do is I used to punish selfish people who would sort of go in at the last second. I'd be like, I'll put a dent in my car before I let you in because you're selfish and you're a bully. I'm right, self-righteous. But I'm creating traffic. The smart thing to do is to actually let them in. So the idea of I want to let them in is actually the care for the entire group of people, not just my wanting to punish this shithead. Care, broader, different solution sets and the motivation to pursue them. Now let's bring AI into it. Let's say that you're saying I am traffic versus I am stuck in traffic. And let's say like 30 or 40% of the cars around you are self-driving. And maybe we've had the wisdom to say that they should optimize for the flow of traffic rather than, a lot of traffic engineering is like fluid dynamics, except if each water molecule was selfish as hell and trying to screw over all the other water molecules. It's very inefficient. So maybe if a third or more of the drivers are pursuing this optimizing for flow strategy, then we might hit that tipping point. Did that make sense? So the expansion of care, and there's some ways in which AI can either offload the stuff that we're bad at because we get, fear, hatred, delusion, all those things, as well as it might just provoke us to think about, does it really matter if I'm there a minute or a half early or not?
That's fascinating to think about. And also, your behavior in traffic makes me think you're Egyptian in a past life. So before we close our kind of one-on-one and open for more of a wider discussion, which I'm thrilled for, is there anything else you wanna add, or any other points you want to leave us with?
People ask me this, they assume that I'm optimistic about how things are going to go, and I don't know. But what I do know is, like, this is a high inflection point. I want to make sure I do my part. And, essentially what we're talking about is how do you operationalize love in a way that interfaces with the technical world, where it's not so different. So again, this is why we're presenting as care as a driver of intelligence. We're saying this is the smart play. Like, this will actually help you navigate the complexity and ambiguity that's to come.
And it's a major shift from how the world has operated for the past at least a couple of thousand years.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why we're feeling all this uncertainty. It's because everything is changing, the fundamentals of how we operate.
Could be.
The winning strategy has changed, I guess.
So again, so this is weird. But I do think that love is the only winning move on the chessboard.
And how would you say AI would think about that? Like, would AI agree with that statement? Does it care about love as much as we do, or is it more of a human thing?
I have no idea. I mean, it
No
doesn't,
idea,
it's not
yeah.
there yet. We're building it.
Right.
So will it have those emergent qualities? Yes or no?
Hmm.
To me, so one final thing is the way that we measure these things now is we measure the output of a system and say, is it just, is it fair, is it love? I think it's much more of an input than an output. So in this case, I'm thinking like, how can we jam in this concept of care at every single level? So if you were building a complex system and you wanted it to have the quality of privacy, you wouldn't have like a privacy detector at the end of it and understand each causal link that could break and to be like, oh, there's no privacy because this broke and now the light goes red. If every person and entity designing that system thinks about privacy, and if a certain number of people have had the felt experience of privacy or the absence of privacy, if they've been stalked, or they've had their identity stolen, or they've had a government spy on them, then if you have privacy as a mindset that goes into all of it, then you don't really need to understanding each little widget and how it unfolds. It becomes an emergent quality. So if we then shift privacy to love, then we just have to figure out how do we jam in love at in Buddhism it's called bodhicitta. It means love mind, love cognition, love feeling.
Yeah.
So if we can develop this bodhicitta as it shows up in these technical systems, then I have a reasonable faith that it'll be more likely that ends up as the output of these systems. And we don't need to magically predict every little thing ahead of time.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. A lot of us consume content but find it hard to integrate it back into our daily lives. If you're ready to go beyond listening and actually rebuild your health, join us at The Human Way. It's my step-by-step interactive course to help you recover body and mind after a hard time. Start today and begin your comeback at thehuman-.com/course. I'll see you there.
All right, so we're going to do a few minutes of what's called meditation. And all we're talking about is paying attention on purpose to what's going on in different ways. So that's all there is to it. I actually don't like to start with a bell because there's this idea of like, I'm meditating, I'm not meditating. Like even right now, you'd be like, wait, are we meditating now? So meditating is almost just more of an intention to be aware of what's going on. So that's it, just right now. Like what's going on? What are you aware of? So for me, I just became aware there's a fan above us. I became aware that the air is moving. I hear a ticking of a clock. I just became notice of that sparkly thing over there. So all we're doing is just paying attention to our attention and noting what's going on. That's it. So I'm going to be offering some guides. If we think of our attention like a spotlight, a lot of times our attention is going all over the place. It's going to whatever's novel or loud. But let's actually take control of our spotlight and putting it on the sensations of breathing. So presumably you're breathing right now. If you're not breathing, please turn blue and keel over and let us know. And one of the things we can do to help paying attention is shutting the eyes, just to simplify things. So if it feels right to you, allow the eyes to shut. And then with some curiosity, check out what is breathing? How do you know you're breathing? Just a gentle curiosity. What's there to be felt? Let's play a little game of investigation. Taking your spotlight of attention, put it on your belly. Look to see what sensations are available that are associated with this act of breathing. Now, immediately, our minds might get sidetracked with a list of opinions about our bellies. Totally fine. But without getting caught up in that, just to say, how do you know you're breathing? We can have the sense of a bellows-like action from the diaphragm, this muscle in our abdomen, and then the rest of our midsection sort of shifting to accommodate. Maybe we can have a sensation of whatever clothing is at our waist. And the belly and the diaphragm is an interesting place, sneaky place of holding tension. So maybe even as you breathe in, of just allowing that tension to dissipate, if there's any there, soften. Inviting but not demanding a soft belly. Looking to see as we're paying attention to breathing whether or not anything shifts. It doesn't need to, but it might. And then putting that spotlight of attention, then move it up your chest, sort of your rib cage area. Investigating what sensations are there to be felt. A sense of the expansion and contraction of the rib cage to accommodate the inflation and the deflation of the lungs. We may notice that the inhale might feel satisfying in some way. Or if it's not, that's fine too, just noting that. And then moving that spotlight of attention now to the head, looking for what are the sensations of breathing that are available to be noticed. These can be a sensation of coolness through the nose or the mouth, depending on where you're breathing on the inhale. And a warm, maybe moistness on the exhale. Maybe you can feel the air on the tips of your nostrils passing forth. Just watching the breath. So I invite you to choose one of these spaces, the belly, the chest, the nostrils, whichever one seems nicest or easiest. And just watch the breath from that vantage point. We notice that the breath actually has multiple parts. There's the inhale, a little pause, a little moment of silence, and then the exhale. And then another moment of stillness as that tide reverses again. And the thing about paying attention is after a shockingly short amount of time, the brain interjects into this gentle watching with thoughts about one thing or another, judging, evaluating, shopping lists, something else. This is the normal functioning of a human brain. Nothing wrong with it. So when that happens, not to meet it with resistance or anger or feeling like I'm bad at this, but instead just to note that's how human brains work, and then to, with an absolute gentleness, retaking control of your spotlight and putting it back on the breathing. This process of losing track of our attention and then regaining it, that's actually the meditation. Realizing your attention has wandered and regathering it. It's a moment of waking up, of liberation. It's a good idea not to meet that with anger or resentment or a feeling that something's wrong. How could you be angry at coming home? And then while keeping one aspect of our awareness on the sensations of breathing, see if we can also allow to co-arise a sense of gratitude. We literally have been breathing since the moment we were born. It nourishes us, cleans out carbon dioxide from our system that we create. We're unaware of it 99% of the time. But what a gift to breathe. Allowing thoughts to come and go, with just keeping one root down into the in-breath, the pause, and the out-breath. Just riding the swells of the breathing. And then you can allow your eyes to open slowly. As I get ready to ring the bell, and as I mentioned, there can be this real sense of like, on your mark, get set, meditate, and then when the bell rings, like, it's over. But what would it be like, even though we're recording a podcast, to just keep one little bit of that attention of, I want to pay attention to what's going on with a slightly different level. All right, and that was a meditation.
Wow, thank you so much. You're a beautiful person. Thank you so much for
Thanks,
everything
man.
you do in your life and like the amount of just support you've given me and the amount of care that you put into every single thing that you do in terms of just spreading the teachings also and not stopping at a certain frontier. So I really appreciate you. Thank you for
Thanks, man. It's great to be here.
this episode, and thanks for giving us so many things to think about.
And if your brain hurts, that's just how it is.
Thank you. Please give Bill a big round of applause. And also show some love for Vulcan back there.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Up next on the Human Recovery Lab.
I'm not a violent person, but it's important to be skilled in violence. Because at the Shaolin Temple, these are people who are trying to reach enlightenment, but there's always someone who's going to try to stop you from reaching enlightenment.
Yeah.
So having the ability to defend yourself is the same ability that you need to eat and get water, right? And so martial arts is born out of the need to be able to secure your life. And so when you practice martial arts, it's not really about fighting, it's about inner conflict resolution. You get to see yourself clearly. And you talked about kind of mirroring. Actually, when you are working with somebody, you see yourself. You see your fears, you see your doubts, you see all of the things. It's so clear to you what you need to work on. So it becomes like a canvas for you to work out yourself. But I will say this, I do not believe martial arts is a cure-all. I don't think it makes you a better person. I actually believe it's an amplifier of who you already are.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'm your host, Omar Shaker. The music you heard was composed live by Vulcan Aaron. Huge shout out to Omar Adib and Mustafa Lazabi, our audio team, as well as Daniel Kaheka and Apricot, our video editors, Veronica Fields for her support in the studio, and Mark Wagenseal on percussion. Follow the Human Recovery Lab on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and get our latest updates on thehumanrecoverylab.com.